We found out our son was switched at birth, but meeting them made things worse. The blood test results were scattered across Dr. Martinez's desk like pieces of a shattered mirror, each one reflecting an impossible truth. My hands trembled as I stared at the genetic markers, the chromosomal breakdowns, the cold scientific proof that the boy I'd raised for 16 years wasn't biologically mine. Mrs. Chen, I know this is overwhelming, Dr. Martinez said softly, adjusting his glasses. But given Tyler's medical emergency last week, we had to run comprehensive genetic testing to rule out hereditary factors for his appendicitis complications. This discrepancy, it's something we're legally obligated to investigate. Tyler. My Tyler, who still left his soccer cleats by the front door and made terrible jokes at dinner. Who'd inherited David's stubborn streak and my tendency to cry at commercials, except apparently he hadn't inherited anything from us at all. How does this happen? David's voice cracked beside me. My husband of 19 years looked like he'd aged a decade in the past hour. How do babies just get switched? Dr. Martinez pulled out a thick folder. St. Mary's Hospital, August 15, 2007. There was a power outage that night during a particularly busy delivery period. The backup generators failed for approximately 47 minutes. In the chaos, it appears the identification bands on 2 newborns were compromised. August 15th. The night I'd labored for 14 hours, the night the lights kept flickering, the night I'd been so exhausted I barely registered the brief time they'd taken Tyler to the nursery for routine checks. The other family, I whispered. Do they know? We contacted them this morning. The Ashfords have agreed to meet with you tomorrow at 2 p.m., here at the hospital. Dr. Martinez hesitated. Mrs. Chen, I should mention, they've requested their attorney be present. The Ashfords. Even the name sounded wealthy, polished. My stomach churned as I thought about our modest 3-bedroom house with its leaky faucet and peeling paint on the garage door. What kind of life had our biological son been living? What's his name? The question escaped before I could stop it. The boy they raised? Dr. Martinez consulted his notes. James Ashford. He's also 16, obviously. Born at 11:42 p.m., just 18 minutes after Tyler. James. Our son was named James, and I'd never sung him lullabies or kissed his scraped knees or cheered at his Little League games. Someone else had done all of that while I'd been loving Tyler with my whole heart, never knowing he belonged to someone else. Can we see a picture? David asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Martinez slid a printed photograph across the desk. The boy staring back at us had David's dark eyes and the same stubborn cowlick I'd spent years trying to tame on Tyler. But where Tyler was all easy smiles and boundless energy, this boy, James, looked guarded, almost hollow. Even in what appeared to be a school photo, his smile seemed forced. Tomorrow's meeting, I managed to say. What exactly are we supposed to discuss? The Ashfords' attorney mentioned they have some proposals for moving forward. Given the complexity of the situation, they want to explore all options. Options. As if our children were chess pieces to be moved around a board instead of human beings with hearts and feelings and 16 years of memories with the wrong families. I gripped David's hand tighter, my wedding ring pressing into his palm. Tomorrow, we'd meet the people who'd been raising our son. Tomorrow, everything would change again. The Ashford estate sat behind wrought iron gates that probably cost more than our annual mortgage payments. As David turned our 10-year-old Honda into the circular driveway, I counted 3 luxury cars parked in front of a house that looked like it belonged in a magazine spread rather than suburban Connecticut. Jesus, David muttered, parking next to a gleaming black Mercedes. Tyler's been eating ramen for lunch while his biological brother probably has a personal chef. My hands were shaking again. They'd been doing that constantly since yesterday's meeting with Dr. Martinez. I barely slept, spending most of the night staring at that school photo of James, memorizing every feature that should have been familiar but felt like looking at a stranger. The front door opened before we could ring the bell. A woman in her mid-40s stood there, blonde hair pulled back in a perfect chignon, wearing what I was pretty sure was a Chanel suit. Everything about Vivian Ashford screamed money and control. Mr. and Mrs. Chen, she said, extending a manicured hand. Her smile was polished but didn't reach her eyes. I'm Vivian. Please, come in. The foyer alone was larger than our living room. Crystal chandeliers, marble floors, oil paintings that looked original and expensive. I felt suddenly self-conscious about my Target dress and 2-year-old flats. Richard is in his study with our attorney, Vivian continued, leading us down a hallway lined with family photos. I couldn't help scanning them desperately for glimpses of James, our James. In every picture, he stood slightly apart from the family, never quite fitting their polished perfection. Richard Ashford was exactly what I'd expected, silver-haired, expensive suit, the kind of commanding presence that probably made boardrooms go quiet. The attorney, a sharp-faced woman named Patricia Delacroix, had files spread across an antique desk that was probably worth more than our car. Let's cut to the chase, Richard said without preamble. This situation is complicated, but not insurmountable. We've raised James for 16 years. You've raised Tyler. The most sensible solution is a gradual transition back to biological families. A gradual transition? I echoed, my voice coming out higher than intended. Supervised visits at first, Patricia explained, consulting her notes. Then perhaps weekends, leading to full custody exchanges within 6 months. We understand this is emotional, but practically speaking, it's the cleanest solution. David leaned forward. You're talking about our children like their property being returned to the correct owners. Aren't they? Vivian's tone was ice cold. James has been raised with certain expectations. Private school, tennis lessons, college prep for Harvard. Tyler has been raised in a completely different environment. They belong with their biological families. The casual cruelty in her voice made my stomach lurch. What does James think about all this? Something flickered across Richard's face, annoyance, maybe. James is adjusting to the news. He's always been a difficult child. Moody, ungrateful. Perhaps genetics explain why he's never quite fit our family dynamic. The words hit me like a physical blow. Difficult. Ungrateful. This was how they spoke about our son, the child we should have been protecting for 16 years. Where is he? I asked. We'd like to meet him. That's not advisable yet, Patricia interjected quickly. The psychological evaluations need to be completed first. Dr. Brennan will be conducting assessments on both boys next week. However, Richard continued, Tyler is welcome to visit anytime. We'd like to get him started with our family counselor, discuss enrollment at Ashford Academy for the fall. They wanted to take Tyler and mold him into their image while treating our biological son like a disappointing investment. The rage building in my chest felt volcanic. I want to see James, I said firmly, standing up from the leather chair that probably cost more than Tyler's entire bedroom set. Right now. Richard and Vivian exchanged a look that made my skin crawl. It was the kind of silent communication that spoke of secrets and control. As I said, that's not advisable, Patricia began, but I cut her off. He's my son. Our son. I gestured to David, who was gripping the arms of his chair so tightly his knuckles had gone white. I don't care what your attorney thinks is advisable. Sarah, David said quietly, standing beside me. They can't keep us from him. Vivian's perfectly composed mask slipped for just a moment. James is upstairs, but he's having one of his episodes. He gets overwhelmed easily. The news about the switch has been particularly difficult for him to process. Episodes. The way she said it made my heart clench. What kind of episodes? Panic attacks, Richard said dismissively, waving his hand as if swatting away an annoying fly. He's been seeing Dr. Brennan for 3 years now. Anxiety, depression, defiance issues. We've invested over $40,000 in therapy, and he's still. He trailed off with a frustrated sigh. $40,000 in therapy. Our son had needed that much help, and they spoke about it like a failed business venture. I'm going upstairs, I announced, heading toward the hallway. Mrs. Chen, you can't just, Patricia started. Watch me. The staircase was wide and curved, lined with more family portraits that told the story I was beginning to understand. James appeared in fewer and fewer photos as the years progressed, and when he did, he looked increasingly isolated, increasingly lost. Third door on the left, Vivian called from below, her voice tight with barely concealed anger. I knocked softly on the door. James? My name is Sarah Chen. I'd like to talk to you, if that's okay. Silence stretched for nearly a minute. Then, quietly, are you my real mom? The words nearly brought me to my knees. Yes. Yes, I am. The door opened slowly. The boy standing there was taller than Tyler, probably around 5 feet 10 inches, with David's build and my grandfather's nose. But it was his eyes that devastated me. They held a pain no 16-year-old should carry. You look different than I imagined, he said softly. What did you imagine? He shrugged, a gesture so achingly familiar it made my chest tight. Tyler did the exact same thing when he was trying to hide how much something mattered. Rich, I guess. Like them. I always wondered why I was such a disappointment. I stepped into his room without asking permission. It was beautiful, expensive furniture, top-of-the-line computer, shelves full of books, but it felt sterile, like a high-end hotel room rather than a teenager's sanctuary. No posters on the walls, no mess, no personality. You're not a disappointment, I said fiercely. You could never be a disappointment. James sat heavily on his perfectly made bed. Richard says I have bad genes. That's why I can't focus like I should, why I'm not good at tennis, why I cry too much. His voice was matter-of-fact, but I could hear 16 years of damage in those words. James. I sat beside him, fighting every instinct that wanted to pull him into my arms. That's not true. None of that is true. The panic attack started when I was 13, he continued, staring at his hands. Right after Richard told me I was wasting my potential. Vivian thinks I do it for attention. Downstairs, I could hear raised voices, David arguing with the Ashfords about something. But up here, in this cold, perfect room, I was finally meeting my son, and my heart was breaking for every day I hadn't been there to protect him. Tell me about Tyler, James said suddenly. What's he like? I spent the next hour learning about my son through fragments, how he loved astronomy but the Ashfords dismissed it as impractical, how he taught himself guitar in secret because Richard thought music was a waste of time for someone with James's academic deficiencies. He told me about panic attacks during family dinners when conversation turned to his underperformance, about nights spent researching colleges he'd never be allowed to attend because they weren't prestigious enough for the Ashford name. I have a 3.8 GPA, he said quietly, but Richard says that's mediocre for someone with my advantages. Tyler probably does better than me, doesn't he? Tyler has a 3.2, I admitted. And we're incredibly proud of him. Grades don't measure worth, James. Something shifted in his expression, surprise, maybe even hope. Really? Before I could answer, Vivian's voice cut through the room like ice. I think that's enough bonding time. She stood in the doorway, her perfect composure cracked around the edges. Behind her, I could see David and Richard in heated discussion by the staircase. James needs to prepare for his session with Dr. Brennan tomorrow, Vivian continued. And frankly, this conversation is counterproductive to his therapeutic progress. What kind of therapy? I asked, standing slowly. Cognitive behavioral therapy focused on managing his emotional outbursts and unrealistic expectations, she replied with clinical precision. Dr. Brennan has been working with James to accept his limitations and appreciate what this family has provided. The words made my skin crawl. They were paying someone to convince our son he was fundamentally flawed. I'd like to speak with Dr. Brennan, I said. That won't be possible. Doctor-patient confidentiality, you understand. Not if James gives consent. You're 16, right? I looked at James, who nodded. You can make that decision yourself. Vivian's face hardened. James doesn't make medical decisions in this household. Richard and I are his legal guardians. For now, I said quietly, but the threat hung in the air like smoke. The ride home was silent until we pulled into our driveway. Tyler's bike was thrown carelessly on the front lawn, soccer ball still muddy from practice. Normal teenage chaos that suddenly felt precious. We can't let them keep him, David said finally. And we can't let them take Tyler. I stared at our house, modest but filled with love, then thought about James in that sterile room. Did you see the family photos? He's miserable, David. He's been miserable for years. What did Richard say to you while I was with James? David's jaw tightened. He offered us money. $2 million to let this whole situation settle quietly. Said it would be better for everyone if we didn't disrupt James's therapeutic progress with false hope. $2 million. More money than we'd see in a lifetime, offered like it was nothing to make us disappear from our son's life. There's more, David continued. I did some research on my phone while you were upstairs. Richard Ashford sits on the boards of 3 major hospitals, including St. Mary's. Patricia Delacroix has represented the Ashford family for 15 years. And Dr. Brennan? He's been the Ashfords' personal psychiatrist since 2019. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. They know. About the switch. They've known for longer than they're admitting. Has to be. Think about it, a power outage that convenient? Records that took 16 years to surface? And they just happened to have their lawyer ready for our first meeting? I thought about James's hollow eyes, his carefully controlled voice when he talked about being a disappointment. How long had they known he wasn't their biological son? How long had they been treating him like damaged goods while raising Tyler's biological brother as their heir apparent? Tyler burst through the front door, soccer bag slung over his shoulder, completely unaware that his entire world was about to implode. Hey, how'd the hospital meeting go? Is everything okay with my blood work? Looking at Tyler's innocent face, still flushed from soccer practice, I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff. How do you tell your 16-year-old son that everything he's ever known about his identity is a lie? Tyler, we need to talk, David said gently. Come sit down. Oh God, it's cancer, isn't it? Tyler dropped his soccer bag and rushed over. That's why you've been acting weird since the hospital. The blood tests found something bad. No, sweetheart. You're healthy. I patted the couch between David and me. But the tests did reveal something unexpected. For the next 20 minutes, we explained the impossible. Tyler's reaction cycled through disbelief, confusion, and finally a devastating kind of hurt that made my chest ache. So my real parents are rich? He asked quietly. Like, really rich? Money doesn't matter, David said firmly. You're our son. That will never change. Tyler stared at his hands that apparently carried none of our genetic markers but had still learned to throw a perfect spiral because David taught him in our backyard every Sunday for 3 years. Do they want me back? The question was barely a whisper. They want to meet you, I said carefully. But Tyler, what they want doesn't matter as much as what you want. What about James? What's he like? I thought about our biological son in that sterile room, carrying 16 years of psychological damage. He's had a harder time than you have. The Ashfords aren't like us. Tyler looked up sharply. What do you mean? Before I could answer, David's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and frowned. It's Dr. Martinez. Says it's urgent. He put the call on speaker. Dr. Martinez? We're here with Tyler. I'm glad you're all together. I just received some disturbing information from a colleague at St. Mary's. Mr. and Mrs. Chen, the Ashfords have filed a petition with family court. They're requesting immediate temporary custody of Tyler pending genetic verification hearings. The words hit like ice water. They can't do that, I said. We just met them this afternoon. They're claiming that Tyler is being denied access to necessary medical care and educational opportunities. Their attorney filed an emergency motion citing parental interference with biological reunification. Tyler's face went white. They want to take me away from you? There's more, Dr. Martinez continued. They've also filed for a restraining order preventing you from contacting James without supervised visitation. The hearing is scheduled for Friday morning at 9 a.m. David stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. This is insane. We're Tyler's parents. We've raised him for 16 years. Unfortunately, Connecticut law regarding switched children is complex. There's precedent for biological parents being granted emergency custody, especially when one family can demonstrate significantly superior financial resources for the child's welfare. Superior financial resources? I felt rage building in my throat. We love him. We've always loved him. I understand, Mrs. Chen. But legally, the Ashfords can argue that Tyler has been denied his birthright, private education, medical care, college preparation funds. They've already established a trust fund in his name worth $1.2 million. Tyler made a choking sound. $1 million? They're trying to buy him, David said grimly. And make us look like unfit parents in the process. There's something else, Dr. Martinez said reluctantly. The Ashfords have hired a private investigator. They're looking into your finances, your background, Tyler's academic performance. Mrs. Chen, they know about David's unemployment period last year. My heart sank. David had been laid off for 4 months when his company downsized. We'd struggled, missed a mortgage payment, had to ask my parents for help with groceries. Nothing we weren't proud to have overcome together, but in court, it would look like instability. What about James? I asked desperately. What happens to him? The Ashfords are arguing that James has specialized medical needs that require their continued guardianship. They're presenting his therapy records as evidence that removing him from their care would be psychologically harmful. After Dr. Martinez hung up, the 3 of us sat in stunned silence. Outside, Mrs. Patterson was walking her dog, completely unaware that our family was being torn apart by legal documents and old money. I don't want to go with them, Tyler said suddenly, his voice strong despite the tears in his eyes. I don't care about the money or the big house. I want to stay here. You're my parents. And James is our son, I said, pulling Tyler closer. We're not letting them destroy either of you. David turned from the window, his expression grim but determined. Then we fight. All of us. Together. That evening, while Tyler was upstairs video calling his best friend Marcus about the insanity of our situation, I found myself researching the Ashford family on every platform I could find. What I discovered made my blood run cold. Richard Ashford wasn't just wealthy, he was connected. Board member of St. Mary's Hospital, major donor to the Connecticut family court system, golf partners with half the judges in our county. His LinkedIn showed connections to politicians, medical administrators, and legal powerhouses. Vivian served on the boards of 3 private schools and chaired the Children's Mental Health Foundation that funded Dr. Brennan's research. David, I called him over to my laptop. Look at this. The screen showed a newspaper article from 2019. Ashford Foundation donates $500,000 to family court mediation program. There was Richard, shaking hands with Judge Patricia Morrison, the same judge listed on tomorrow's emergency custody hearing. They own the system, David said grimly, reading over my shoulder. The hospital, the court, the therapist. No wonder they're so confident. My phone buzzed with an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. Mrs. Chen? This is Dr. Elizabeth Brennan. I understand you'd like to speak with me about James. I put the call on speaker and grabbed a pen. Dr. Brennan, yes. Thank you for calling. I'm ethically obligated to inform you that James requested I contact you directly. However, I must emphasize that this conversation is highly irregular given the current legal proceedings. What can you tell me about his treatment? I asked carefully. There was a long pause. Mrs. Chen, I've been treating James for 3 years. When he first came to me, his parents, the Ashfords, requested I focus on what they called adjustment issues. James was having difficulty accepting family expectations and displaying what they termed inappropriate emotional responses. My hands tightened around the phone. Inappropriate how? Crying during family discussions about his academic performance. Anxiety attacks before family social events. Resistance to participating in activities he found uncomfortable. Another pause. Mrs. Chen, in my professional opinion, James has been displaying classic symptoms of emotional neglect and psychological pressure. David leaned closer. Are you saying the Ashfords have been abusive? I'm saying that my treatment recommendations have consistently focused on family therapy and environmental modifications. The Ashfords have refused both, preferring to medicate James's anxiety and continue individual sessions aimed at helping him adapt. Medicate? My voice came out sharper than intended. Lexapro, 20 milligrams daily since age 14. Lorazepam is needed for panic attacks. Mrs. Chen, James has been asking me for months if his anxiety might improve in a different environment. Today, after learning about the switch, he specifically asked if biological family reunion therapy might be beneficial. I felt tears starting. What did you tell him? I told him that environmental factors play a significant role in adolescent mental health outcomes. And Mrs. Chen? I told him that love and acceptance are more therapeutically valuable than any medication I could prescribe. After Dr. Brennan hung up with promises to document our conversation in James's file, David and I sat processing what we'd learned. Our son had been medicated into compliance, treated like a defective product that needed fixing rather than a child who needed love. There's something else, I said, showing David a news article I'd found. 2018, the Ashfords were investigated by social services for educational pressure, complaints from James's previous school. The case was dismissed after a substantial donation to the investigators' department. David's phone rang. Tyler's contact photo, a goofy selfie from last summer's camping trip, filled the screen. Mom? Dad? Tyler's voice was shaky. Marcus's mom just called. There are reporters outside. They know about the switch. The reporters were like vultures circling fresh roadkill. I counted at least 6 news vans parked along our quiet street, their satellite dishes reaching toward the gray October sky like mechanical flowers. Neighbors stood on their porches, phones out, recording the chaos that had descended on Maple Street. How did they find out so fast? David muttered, peering through our living room blinds. A woman with perfectly styled hair was speaking earnestly into a camera, our house forming the backdrop for what would probably be the evening news lead story. My phone had been buzzing nonstop for the past hour. Unknown numbers, missed calls, text messages from reporters offering exclusive opportunities to share our side of the story. I turned off the ringer after the 15th call, but the screen continued lighting up like a disco ball. Tyler sat on our couch, knees pulled to his chest, watching the spectacle through the window with wide eyes. Mrs. Patterson is talking to them, he said quietly. She's pointing at our house. Vultures, I whispered. Mrs. Patterson had lived next door for 8 years, had brought us casseroles when Tyler was sick, had watched our house during vacations. Now she was probably telling reporters about our financial struggles and how surprising this all was. David's phone rang, a number we recognized. Dr. Martinez. Dr. Chen, I'm assuming you're seeing the news coverage. I want you to know this didn't come from our office. Patient confidentiality laws. Then where? David interrupted. The Ashfords held a press conference an hour ago. Richard Ashford is framing this as a tragic case of stolen opportunity and announcing their intention to restore their biological son to his rightful place in society. He's claiming you've been hiding Tyler from his true heritage since learning about the switch. My stomach dropped. That's a complete lie. We just found out yesterday. I know that, but perception becomes reality in cases like this. Mrs. Chen, you need to understand, they're controlling the narrative. Richard Ashford has significant media connections. This story is already picked up by CNN and Fox News. I grabbed my laptop and pulled up CNN's website. There it was, third story down, wealthy Connecticut family fights for switched son's return. The article painted a devastating picture, the poor boy trapped in poverty while his rightful family desperately sought to provide him with educational and medical advantages befitting his true station. They'd somehow obtained Tyler's school photo from 2 years ago, alongside a professional portrait of James in what looked like a prep school uniform. The visual contrast was exactly what they'd intended, Tyler looking young and slightly awkward next to James's polished perfection. Listen to this, I said, reading aloud. Tyler has been denied access to private education, specialized tutoring, and medical care that could have prevented his recent health crisis, said Richard Ashford, CEO of Ashford Industries. While we harbor no ill will toward the family who raised our son, we cannot stand by while he suffers due to circumstances beyond his control. Health crisis? Tyler looked confused. You mean my appendix? That wasn't because we're poor. David scrolled through his phone. They're everywhere. Local news, social media, even TMZ has picked it up. Look at this headline, rich boy, poor boy, Connecticut hospital switch separates twins by class. We're not even twins, Tyler said weakly. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Mrs. Chen, this is Amanda Rodriguez from Channel 8 News. We'd like to offer you the opportunity to respond to the Ashfords allegations. Please call me at 203-555-0147. Before I could respond, another text, Sarah, Bethany Williams from Hartford Courier. The Ashfords claim you've refused all contact attempts. Can you comment? They're lying, I said, my voice rising. We just met them 6 hours ago. They're the ones who called lawyers and filed emergency custody motions. David stood up abruptly. That's it. We're not hiding in here like criminals. Tyler, get your jacket. Where are we going? Tyler asked, but he was already reaching for his soccer hoodie, the one with holes in the sleeves that he refused to throw away. To see James. If they want a media circus, they're going to get one. But we're not letting them control the story anymore. The drive to the Ashford estate felt like running a gauntlet. 2 news vans followed us, and I watched David's knuckles go white as he gripped the steering wheel. Tyler sat in the back seat, hood pulled up, trying to disappear. What if they don't let us in? He asked as we approached the familiar iron gates. Then we'll stand outside those gates until they do, I said grimly. James needs to know we haven't abandoned him. The gates were closed, but I could see additional security cars parked along the circular driveway. As we pulled up to the intercom, news vans materialized behind us like sharks sensing blood. I rolled down my window and pressed the call button. This is Sarah Chin. We're here to see James. Silence stretched for nearly 30 seconds. Then Vivian's voice, crisp with barely contained anger. This is hardly an appropriate time for a visit. James is our son, I said loudly enough for the reporters to hear. And we're not leaving until we see him. Behind us, car doors were slamming as reporters rushed forward with cameras and microphones. The circus had officially begun. The gates buzzed open with mechanical precision, but as we drove through, I noticed the additional security wasn't just for privacy, it was containment. 2 black SUVs blocked the circular driveway, and men in suits stood positioned around the property like sentries. The Ashfords weren't just hiding from reporters, they were preparing for war. Tyler pressed his face to the car window, taking in the sprawling mansion with wide eyes. Jesus, Mom. Look at the tennis court. And is that a pool house? Remember what we talked about, David said quietly, parking behind the Mercedes. Money doesn't make a family. Vivian met us at the front door, her earlier polished composure replaced by barely controlled fury. She was flanked by Patricia Delacroix and a man I didn't recognize, probably another attorney, given his expensive suit and predatory smile. You've caused quite a scene, Vivian said, not bothering with pleasantries. Those reporters are now camped outside our gates because of your little stunt. Our stunt? I stepped closer, feeling David's steadying hand on my back. You held a press conference painting us as kidnappers. You told the entire world that Tyler's been suffering because of us. Haven't you? The new attorney spoke for the first time. Tyler, is it true you've never been to Europe? Never taken tennis lessons? Never had a private tutor? Tyler shifted uncomfortably. I mean, no, but... And your recent hospitalization could have been prevented with regular private medical care, correct? That's not how appendicitis works, I snapped. And who are you exactly? Marcus Webb, family law specialist. I'm here to document this interaction for tomorrow's custody hearing. He held up a small recording device. For Tyler's protection, of course. David moved protectively in front of Tyler. Where's James? We came to see James. James is having his emergency session with Dr. Brennan, Vivian said smoothly. The media attention has triggered one of his episodes. He's been sedated for his own safety. Sedated. The word hit me like a physical blow. What kind of sedation? Standard anxiety management, Patricia interjected quickly. Perfectly legal and medically necessary. Through the open doorway, I could see into the living room where family photos lined the mantelpiece. But something was different from this morning. Several frames had been turned face down, and I realized with growing horror that they were hiding pictures of James. Erasing him even as they fought to claim Tyler. I want to see him, Tyler said suddenly, his voice stronger than I'd heard all day. I want to meet James. Marcus Webb leaned forward with practiced interest. And how do you feel about joining your biological family, Tyler? The trust fund alone would secure your entire future. I already have a family, Tyler replied, but I could hear uncertainty creeping into his voice as he looked around the opulent foyer. Vivian smiled for the first time since we'd arrived, sensing weakness. Tyler, we've enrolled you at Ashford Academy, that's where James goes. The lacrosse coach is very excited to meet you. And Harvard has a special admissions program for legacy families. Legacy families? Tyler looked confused. The Ashfords have attended Harvard for 4 generations, Richard's voice boomed from the stairway. He descended like a king-granting audience, every inch the successful businessman. Your great-grandfather founded Ashford Industries in 1952. You have a heritage, son. A destiny. Behind Richard, almost hidden in his shadow, stood James. He looked pale and slightly unsteady, whether from medication or emotion, I couldn't tell. But his eyes found mine immediately, and in them I saw a desperate plea for help. James, I breathed, stepping toward the staircase. I told them I wanted to see you, James said quietly, ignoring Vivian's sharp look. I told Dr. Brennan that Tyler should know the truth before he decides anything. What truth? Tyler asked. James looked directly at his biological brother, the boy who'd lived the life that should have been his. That they're going to break you just like they broke me. The silence that followed James's words was deafening. Richard's face darkened, and Vivian moved swiftly toward the staircase, but James stepped back, positioning himself closer to us. What do you mean, break you? Tyler asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Tyler, perhaps we should discuss your academic placement instead, Patricia interrupted, but James cut her off. They gave me pills when I cried about missing Mom and Dad, people I'd never even met but somehow missed anyway, James said, his words tumbling out in a rush. They told me I was emotionally unstable when I couldn't figure out why I never felt like I belonged. Dr. Brennan has me on 20 milligrams of Lexapro daily, plus lorazepam whenever I have what they call unrealistic expectations. Tyler's face went pale. Unrealistic expectations? Like wanting to study astronomy instead of business. Or asking why I couldn't just be average sometimes instead of maximizing my potential. James's voice cracked. Tyler, they're going to love you at first. You're everything they wanted me to be, athletic, outgoing, normal. But the moment you don't fit their perfect mold. That's enough, Richard's voice boomed through the foyer. James, return to your room immediately. Dr. Brennan specifically said. Dr. Brennan said I should tell the truth, James shot back, and for the first time, I heard strength in his voice. She said hiding feelings is what made me sick in the first place. Marcus Webb stepped forward, recording device held high. For the record, are you stating that James Ashford is making false accusations against his legal guardians? I'm stating, James said clearly, looking directly into the recorder, that Richard Ashford told me last week that my genetic defects finally made sense now that he knows I'm not really his son. He said Tyler probably doesn't have the weak emotional constitution that's made me such a disappointment. The words hung in the air like smoke. Vivian's perfectly composed mask finally cracked completely. You misunderstood the context, she said frantically. Richard was simply explaining the scientific basis for what? I stepped between James and the Ashfords, maternal instinct overriding everything else. For 16 years of emotional abuse? For convincing a child he's fundamentally broken? Tyler moved to stand beside James, and seeing them together, these two boys who should have grown up as brothers, broke something inside my chest. Tyler, confident and loved despite our modest means, next to James, damaged by wealth and expectations. The recording stops now, David said firmly, reaching for Marcus Webb's device. Mr. Chen, this is evidence gathering for legal proceedings, Webb protested, but David's expression was enough to make him step back. Evidence of what? That you've been medicating a teenager for having normal human emotions? David turned to Richard, his voice deadly quiet. We looked up your foundation donations, Ashford. Funny how much money you've given to Dr. Brennan's research on adolescent compliance therapy. Richard's face flushed red. How dare you imply? I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts. I pulled out my phone, scrolling to the screenshots I'd taken during my research. 2019, $150,000 to Brennan's study on pharmaceutical management of teenage behavioral issues. 2021, another $200,000 for research on family hierarchy maintenance through therapeutic intervention. Vivian grabbed Richard's arm, whispering urgently in his ear. Whatever she said made his expression shift from anger to calculation. Mrs. Chen, Richard said, his voice suddenly smooth again, I think you're misunderstanding the situation. Perhaps we should discuss this privately, without the boys present. Marcus, please escort Tyler and James to the library. No, Tyler said firmly, surprising everyone. Whatever you're going to say, James deserves to hear it. We both do. For 16 years, Tyler had been our sweet, sometimes timid son. But standing in that marble foyer, protecting a brother he'd just met, he looked like David, stubborn and unshakable when defending someone he loved. Richard smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Very well. Tyler, we're prepared to offer your adoptive family a settlement. $5 million for a clean, quiet custody transfer. No court battles, no media circus, no messy investigations into anyone's parenting methods. The number hung in the air like a curse. $5 million. More money than David and I would see in 3 lifetimes, offered casually like Richard was negotiating for a used car. You think you can buy my son? The words came out lower and more dangerous than I'd ever heard my own voice. I think I can provide Tyler with opportunities you never could, Richard replied smoothly. Harvard tuition alone is $60,000 per year. Add graduate school, a trust fund for his children, connections that will set him up for life. What can you offer him? A state school education and a mortgage on a house that needs a new roof? The accuracy of his assessment stung because he'd clearly done his homework. Our roof did need work. Tyler would probably end up at UConn with student loans we'd spend decades paying off. In pure financial terms, Richard wasn't wrong. But Tyler stepped closer to James, their shoulders touching in unconscious solidarity. What happens to James in your plan? He asked quietly. Richard's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something cold underneath. James will continue receiving the specialized care he requires. Dr. Brennan feels he's made significant progress in accepting his limitations. His limitations? James's voice cracked with a bitter laugh. You mean accepting that I'll never be good enough for this family? Vivian moved toward James with predatory grace. Sweetheart, you're having another episode. Let me call Dr. Brennan. Stop. The word exploded from me with such force that even Marcus Webb jumped. Stop gaslighting him. Stop pretending his pain is mental illness when you spent 16 years systematically destroying his self-worth. Mrs. Chen, Patricia interjected smoothly, you're making serious accusations without legal standing. I have standing. I'm his mother. I looked directly at James, seeing David's stubborn chin and my grandmother's gentle eyes in a face that had been taught to apologize for existing. And I'm taking him home. Marcus Webb's recording device clicked back on. Are you stating your intention to remove James Ashford from his legal guardian's custody without court approval? David stepped forward, his contractor's hand steady despite everything. We're stating our intention to protect our son from further psychological abuse. Psychological abuse? Richard's laugh was sharp as broken glass. We've given James every advantage money can buy. Private school, tutoring, therapy, medications prescribed by the finest psychiatrists in Connecticut. You've given him trauma, I interrupted. 16 years of being told he's broken, defective, disappointing. That's not love, Mr. Ashford. That's systematic emotional destruction. Tyler's phone buzzed in his pocket, and he glanced at it with growing alarm. Guys? The reporter's outside, there's like 20 news vans now. And someone posted a video on TikTok that already has 500,000 views. What video? Vivian demanded. Tyler held up his phone, showing a shaky recording taken through the iron gates. The audio was muffled but audible enough to catch James saying, they're going to break you just like they broke me. Shit, Marcus Webb muttered, then caught himself. This complicates the custody hearing significantly. Richard's calculated composure finally cracked. You've destroyed everything, he snarled at me. Do you have any idea what this media attention will do to my business? To James's therapeutic progress? To our family's reputation? Your reputation? James stood straighter than I'd seen him since we arrived, something shifting in his posture. What about my life? What about Tyler's? We're not chess pieces in your game. James, you need your medication, Vivian said frantically, reaching into her purse for what looked like a pill bottle. This stress is clearly triggering. No. James backed away from her, positioning himself between Tyler and the Ashfords. I'm done being medicated into submission. And I'm done watching you manipulate Tyler the way you manipulated me. Through the windows, I could see the crowd outside growing larger. News crews, neighbors, and now what looked like protesters holding signs I couldn't quite read from this distance. Patricia's phone rang, and she answered with sharp efficiency. After a brief conversation, she turned to Richard with obvious concern. That was Judge Morrison's clerk. The custody hearing has been moved up to 8 a.m. tomorrow due to the media coverage. And Child Protective Services wants to conduct interviews with both boys before the hearing. Richard's face went white. CPS? On what grounds? Anonymous tip about potential emotional abuse and inappropriate medication of a minor, Patricia replied grimly. They'll be here at 6 a.m. The Ashfords exchanged panicked glances, their perfect control finally crumbling. Outside, the circus was growing, and inside, their carefully constructed narrative was falling apart. Time to go, David said quietly, putting protective arms around both boys. Now. The CPS caseworker arrived at our house at 7:30 the next morning, 45 minutes before we were supposed to be in court. Elena Rodriguez was younger than I'd expected, maybe early 30s, with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that immediately put Tyler at ease. I need to speak with Tyler privately first, she explained, settling into our living room with a thick folder and recording device. Then we'll head over to interview James at the Ashford residence. I squeezed Tyler's shoulder before David and I retreated to the kitchen, where we could hear the murmur of conversation but not the specific words. Through our window, I counted at least 12 news vans still parked along Maple Street, their reporters doing live broadcasts about the Connecticut custody battle that's captivating the nation. My phone buzzed constantly with interview requests, social media notifications, and missed calls from numbers I didn't recognize. David had turned his phone off entirely after someone leaked his work number and his construction crew was fielding calls from reporters. Mrs. Chen? Elena called from the living room. Could I speak with you both now? Tyler sat on our couch looking emotionally drained but oddly relieved. Elena's expression was carefully neutral, but I caught her glancing around our modest living room with what seemed like approval, taking in Tyler's soccer trophies on the bookshelf, family photos covering every surface, his homework scattered across the coffee table. Tyler's provided very helpful information, Elena said carefully. He's clearly well-adjusted and feels secure in this environment. However, I need to ask some direct questions about your financial situation. My stomach clenched. What kind of questions? The Ashford's attorney has submitted documentation suggesting Tyler has been denied necessary medical care, educational opportunities, and basic necessities due to financial constraints. Elena consulted her notes. Specifically, they cite delayed dental work, inability to afford college prep courses, and what they term nutritional inadequacies. Nutritional inadequacies? David's voice rose in disbelief. Tyler eats like a horse. Have you seen him? He's perfectly healthy. They provided grocery receipts showing purchases of generic brands, school lunch program enrollment, and a statement from Tyler's dentist about postponed orthodontic treatment. I felt heat rising in my cheeks. Yes, we delayed Tyler's braces for 8 months while David was unemployed. Yes, Tyler qualified for free school lunch, and yes, we bought store-brand cereal because it was $3 cheaper than name brands. But those weren't signs of neglect, they were signs of a family managing their resources responsibly. Tyler, Elena addressed him directly, do you feel your parents have provided adequately for your needs? Are you kidding? Tyler looked genuinely confused. Mom makes my lunch every morning because she says the turkey sandwiches are better than cafeteria food, even though free lunch is easier. Dad taught me to change oil and throw a curveball and how to budget money for the things I want. They've given me everything that matters. Elena made careful notes. And how do you feel about the possibility of living with your biological family? Tyler was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. James is my brother. My real brother, you know? Not because of DNA, but because yesterday he was more worried about protecting me than getting his own freedom. The Ashfords have money, but James has been miserable there for years. That's not the kind of life I want. Even knowing about the trust fund? The educational opportunities? What good is Harvard if you have to take anxiety medication just to get through family dinner? Tyler's voice strengthened. James told me he hasn't felt genuinely happy since he was 12 years old. I'm happy here. Like, actually happy. Isn't that worth more than money? Elena's carefully neutral expression softened almost imperceptibly. Thank you, Tyler. That's very mature insight. After Elena left to interview James, the three of us sat in our kitchen drinking coffee that had gone cold hours ago. The courthouse appearance was in 90 minutes, and I felt like we were walking into a battle armed with nothing but love against an army of lawyers, money, and social connections. Whatever happens today, David said quietly, we fight for both of them. James needs us as much as Tyler does. Tyler nodded solemnly. James asked me last night if I thought people could be happy without expensive stuff. I told him our family proves it every day. Outside, a new news van pulled up, and I recognized the CNN logo on its side. Our small-town custody battle had officially become national news, which meant the pressure on Judge Morrison would be enormous. I just prayed that meant she'd prioritize the boys' actual well-being over the Ashfords' political connections and carefully crafted media narrative. The courthouse steps looked like a war zone. Protesters lined both sides of the walkway, some holding signs reading Money Can't Buy Love, while others declared, Give Tyler his birthright. I gripped Tyler's hand tighter as camera flashes erupted around us, reporters shouting questions we couldn't answer even if we wanted to. Mrs. Chen. Do you believe the Ashfords are unfit parents? Tyler. How does it feel to discover you're worth millions? Is it true James Ashford has been hospitalized for mental health issues? David pushed ahead of us, creating a protective barrier as we climbed the courthouse steps. Inside, the marble corridors echoed with clicking heels and urgent conversations. Our court-appointed attorney, Janet Kim, met us at the security checkpoint looking frazzled. The media coverage has completely changed the dynamics, she said, pulling us aside. Judge Morrison is furious about the circus outside, but that could work in our favor. She doesn't like being pressured by public opinion. We found seats in the gallery behind a wooden barrier that felt more symbolic than protective. The Ashfords were already positioned at the plaintiff's table with their army of attorneys. I counted 4 of them, each with briefcases that probably cost more than our monthly mortgage. James sat in the front row behind them, looking small and lost in a navy suit that was perfectly tailored but somehow made him appear younger rather than more mature. When he turned and saw us, his face lit up with the first genuine smile I'd seen from him. Tyler waved, and for a moment, they looked like what they were, 2 16-year-old boys caught in an impossible situation. All rise for the Honorable Judge Patricia Morrison. Judge Morrison was a stern-faced woman in her early 60s who surveyed the packed courtroom with obvious irritation. Before we begin, I want to make something crystal clear. This is a family court proceeding, not a media circus. I will not tolerate any disruptions, and my decisions will be based solely on the best interests of these children, not public opinion or financial considerations. Patricia Delacroix rose first, her opening statement a masterclass in emotional manipulation. She painted a picture of Tyler, trapped in poverty while his rightful inheritance waited unclaimed. She presented financial documents showing the Ashfords' net worth, $47 million, compared to our modest teacher and contractor salaries. Your Honor, Tyler Chin Ashford has been denied his birthright for 16 years through no fault of anyone in this courtroom. The Ashford family simply seeks to provide their biological son with the advantages that should have been his from birth, private education at Phillips Exeter, guaranteed admission to Harvard, and a trust fund that ensures financial security for life. But then she made a critical error. As for James Ashford, he has specialized medical needs that require continued therapeutic intervention. Dr. Brennan will testify that removing James from his established treatment protocol could result in dangerous psychological regression. Janet Kim stood for our response, and I held my breath. Your Honor, this case isn't about money or social status. It's about love, stability, and the fundamental right of children to be free from emotional manipulation. She gestured toward Tyler. Tyler Chen is a well-adjusted, academically successful, emotionally healthy teenager who has never known anything but unconditional love from his parents. Then she turned toward James, her voice strengthening. James Ashford, meanwhile, has been systematically medicated for the crime of having normal human emotions. The Ashfords' own financial records show payments totaling over $300,000 to Dr. Brennan for what they euphemistically call compliance therapy. Your Honor, love cannot be purchased, and emotional abuse cannot be disguised as medical treatment. Judge Morrison's expression remained unreadable, but I noticed her taking extensive notes during Janet's statement. I'd like to hear from the boys themselves, Judge Morrison announced. James first. James walked to the witness stand on unsteady legs, his hands shaking as he placed them on the Bible. Looking at him up there, pale and fragile, I felt 16 years of maternal instinct surge through me. This was my son, and he'd been suffering while I'd been completely unaware of his existence. James, Judge Morrison said gently, this is your chance to tell me what you want. Not what the adults think is best, but what you truly want. James glanced at the Ashfords, then at us, then back at the judge. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper, but in the silent courtroom, every word carried. Your Honor, I want to go home. I want to go home to people who won't give me pills when I cry, who won't tell me I'm broken when I'm just sad. Tyler's had 16 years of unconditional love, and I've had 16 years of conditional acceptance. I know where I belong now. James's testimony hung in the courtroom air like a prayer. Judge Morrison leaned forward, her stern expression softening as she studied my son, our son, who just laid his heart bare before a room full of strangers. James, can you be more specific about the medication you mentioned? Judge Morrison asked gently. Before James could answer, Patricia Delacroix shot to her feet. Your Honor, we object. James's medical records are confidential, and discussing his treatment without proper psychiatric evaluation could be harmful to his therapeutic progress. Overruled, Judge Morrison said firmly. James, you may answer. James's voice grew stronger. Lexapro, 20 milligrams every morning with breakfast. Lorazepam whenever I have what Richard calls emotional outbursts. But Your Honor, an emotional outburst to them is crying because I miss people I've never met, or asking why I can't study what interests me instead of what they want me to study. I watched Vivian's face drain of color as James continued. Dr. Brennan told me yesterday that normal teenagers feel sad sometimes, angry sometimes, confused sometimes. But every time I felt anything Richard didn't like, it became a medical problem that needed fixing. Judge Morrison made extensive notes. James, do you understand the financial implications of your choice? The Ashfords can provide advantages that. Your Honor, James interrupted, his voice clearer than I'd ever heard it. Tyler asked me yesterday if money could buy happiness. I told him it bought me 16 years of therapy to figure out why I was so miserable despite having everything money could provide. The answer isn't more money. It's love without conditions attached. When Tyler took the stand 15 minutes later, he looked directly at the Ashfords before addressing Judge Morrison. Your Honor, I know this sounds crazy, but meeting James was like looking in a broken mirror. We're the same height, we both bite our nails when we're nervous, we even laugh the same way. But the Ashfords broke something in him that my parents would never let break in me. Richard Ashford shifted uncomfortably at the defendant's table. Tyler noticed and addressed him directly. Mr. Ashford, you offered my parents $5 million to take me away from them quietly. But you know what my dad told me last night? He said he wouldn't trade one of my terrible jokes for all the money in Connecticut. That's the difference between our families, you think love is something you can buy and sell. Patricia Delacroix stood again. Your Honor, while Tyler's loyalty to his adoptive family is touching, he's a minor who cannot fully comprehend the life-altering opportunities he's rejecting. Harvard admission, guaranteed career placement, financial security that extends to his future children. Ms. Delacroix, Judge Morrison interrupted, are you suggesting this court should override a 16-year-old's clearly expressed wishes about his own life? I'm suggesting that minors often make emotionally driven decisions they later regret. Tyler has been manipulated by his adoptive family's financial insecurity into believing love and poverty are somehow more noble than love and prosperity. The accusation hit like a slap. David started to stand, but Janet Kim put a restraining hand on his arm. Tyler's response, however, was devastating in its simplicity. Your Honor, yesterday James asked me what it felt like to come home from school excited to tell my parents about my day. I realized he's never experienced that feeling, ever. The Ashfords made him afraid to share his life with them. My parents taught me that family means having people who celebrate your victories and comfort your defeats. James has been living with people who audit his emotions like a business expense. Judge Morrison called a recess, but as the courtroom emptied, Elena Rodriguez appeared at our side with an expression that made my stomach drop. I just finished interviewing Dr. Brennan, she said quietly. The Ashfords terminated her services this morning and hired a new psychiatrist who's prepared to testify that James is having a psychotic break from reality triggered by meeting you. They're claiming he needs immediate psychiatric hospitalization for his own safety. My blood turned to ice. They're going to have him committed? The new psychiatrist, Dr. Gerald Hoffman, has already signed preliminary evaluation papers. If Judge Morrison awards custody to the Ashfords, they can have James involuntarily committed within hours. Through the courtroom windows, I could see protesters growing more agitated, news crews multiplying, and what looked like police barriers being erected. Our private family crisis had become a public spectacle, and now the Ashfords were using the chaos as cover to destroy our son completely. How long until court resumes? I asked frantically. 20 minutes, Elena replied. But Mrs. Chen, there's something else. Dr. Brennan violated confidentiality protocols to give me this. She handed me a thick manila envelope. James's complete therapy records. She said the public needs to know what these people have done to your son. My hands trembled as I opened the manila envelope. Dr. Brennan's neat handwriting filled page after page of session notes, painting a devastating picture of systematic psychological manipulation that made my stomach lurch. Asterisk Session 47, James reports nightmares about disappointing the family. Recommended family therapy. Parents declined, requesting increased Lexapro dosage instead. Asterisk Session 72, James asked if other families hug their children. When I suggested this indicated healthy emotional needs, Richard Ashford questioned my competence and threatened to find more realistic treatment options. Asterisk Session 103, James brought astronomy textbook to session, excited about potential college major. Parents informed him that impractical interests were signs of genetic weakness and evidence he needed reality adjustment therapy. Asterisk David read over my shoulder, his face growing darker with each page. Jesus Christ, Sarah. They've been torturing him. The most damning entry was dated just 3 months ago. Asterisk Richard Ashford directly asked if medication could make James more compliant and less questioning of family decisions. When I explained that wasn't ethical treatment, he suggested perhaps James needed residential therapeutic intervention to correct his attitude problems. Asterisk Residential intervention, I whispered. They've been planning to ship him away for months. Elena leaned closer, lowering her voice as people began filtering back into the courtroom. There's more. Dr. Brennan documented that James asked her repeatedly if feeling different from his family meant something was wrong with him. She noted that his anxiety and depression symptoms appeared directly related to environmental stressors and emotional invalidation in the home. Tyler appeared at my elbow, having overheard enough to understand the implications. They were going to send James away? Before they even knew about the switch. It gets worse, Elena continued grimly. The new psychiatrist they hired, Dr. Hoffman? He runs a private residential facility in upstate New York. His specialty is intensive behavioral modification for troubled adolescents. The average stay is 18 months. My maternal instincts roared to life. They're planning to warehouse him. Keep him locked away while they parade Tyler around as their perfect son. All rise. Judge Morrison returned with an expression that suggested the recess hadn't improved her mood. The packed courtroom felt electric with tension as she surveyed the chaos her simple custody hearing had become. Before we continue, she announced, I've been reviewing some additional documentation that's come to my attention. She held up papers I recognized as Dr. Brennan's therapy notes. Mr. and Mrs. Ashford, I have some very serious questions about James's medical treatment under your guardianship. Richard stood, his polished confidence finally showing cracks. Your Honor, our son has received the finest psychiatric care available. Dr. Brennan was unfortunately unable to help James accept his place in our family structure, so we've sought more specialized treatment. Specialized treatment involving residential facility placement? Judge Morrison's voice could have frozen water. Mr. Ashford, these therapy notes suggest a pattern of emotional manipulation and inappropriate medication protocols spanning 3 years. Patricia Delacroix rose quickly. Your Honor, those notes represent one therapist's biased perspective. Dr. Hoffman's evaluation clearly shows that James is experiencing a psychological crisis that requires immediate intervention. Dr. Hoffman, Judge Morrison repeated slowly, who you hired yesterday? Whose facility stands to profit significantly from James's residential placement? That Dr. Hoffman? The courtroom erupted in whispers. I watched Vivian grab Richard's arm, whispering frantically in his ear while their legal team huddled in obvious panic. Judge Morrison slammed her gavel. Furthermore, I've just been informed that Child Protective Services has opened a formal investigation into allegations of emotional abuse and medical neglect. This changes the parameters of our discussion considerably. James turned in his seat, his eyes finding mine across the crowded courtroom. For the first time since I'd met him, hope flickered in his expression. But the Ashfords weren't finished yet, and I could see Patricia Delacroix preparing what looked like a final, desperate gambit. Judge Morrison's gavel echoed through the packed courtroom as Patricia Delacroix made one final, desperate play. Your Honor, regardless of these allegations, the law is clear about biological custody rights. The Ashfords are Tyler's biological parents, entitled to. Ms. Delacroix, Judge Morrison interrupted, her voice cutting through the courtroom like steel. I've been a family court judge for 22 years. I've seen parents lose custody for far less than what's documented in these therapy notes. She held up Dr. Brennan's files, her expression thunderous. Systematic emotional abuse, inappropriate medication protocols, threats of residential placement as punishment for normal teenage behavior. The Ashfords have demonstrated a pattern of psychological manipulation that disqualifies them from custody of any child. Richard Ashford shot to his feet, his composed facade finally cracking completely. Your Honor, this is preposterous. We've provided James with every advantage money can buy. Private school, tutoring, medical care. You've provided him with trauma, Judge Morrison replied sharply. Mr. Ashford, your own therapy notes indicate you told a 14-year-old boy he had genetic defects that explained his emotional responses. You medicated normal grief, normal confusion, normal teenage emotions until you nearly destroyed this child's sense of reality. The courtroom was dead silent now, everyone hanging on the judge's words. James sat straighter in his chair, tears streaming down his face, but for the first time since I'd met him, they looked like tears of relief rather than despair. Furthermore, Judge Morrison continued, your last-minute attempt to have James committed to a residential facility appears to be retaliation for his testimony here today. Dr. Hoffman's evaluation is hereby rejected as biased and financially motivated. Vivian Ashford spoke for the first time, her voice shaking. Your Honor, surely the boy's biological heritage should matter. Tyler belongs with his birth family. Mrs. Ashford, Judge Morrison's voice was ice-cold. Tyler belongs with people who love him unconditionally, support his dreams, and treat his emotions as valid human responses rather than medical problems to be medicated away. That family is clearly the Chins. Tyler grabbed my hand, squeezing so tightly I thought he might break bones. Across the aisle, James was openly sobbing now, 16 years of suppressed pain finally finding release. Therefore, Judge Morrison announced, I'm awarding full custody of Tyler Chen to David and Sarah Chen, his psychological parents of 16 years. Furthermore, I'm awarding full custody of James Ashford to the Chen family, effective immediately, based on documented evidence of emotional abuse and medical neglect. The courtroom exploded. Reporters rushed for the doors, protesters cheered and shouted outside, and the Ashfords' legal team erupted in frantic objections. But through it all, I only saw James turning in his seat, his face transformed by the first genuine smile I'd witnessed from him. Both boys will remain with the Chen family pending completion of the CPS investigation, Judge Morrison continued over the chaos. The Ashfords' assets related to James's medical treatment are frozen pending review by the state medical board. As the gavel fell for the final time, James vaulted over the courtroom barrier and threw himself into my arms. He was taller than Tyler, all elbows and desperate need, clinging to me like I might disappear if he let go. Mom, he whispered against my shoulder, the word breaking something inside my chest. Can I really come home? Yes, baby, I whispered back, feeling David's arms wrap around both boys as Tyler joined our embrace. You're coming home. Both of you are coming home. Outside the courthouse, past the cameras and chaos and protesters, our battered Honda sat waiting to take our family, all four of us, finally complete, home to our modest house with its leaky faucet and peeling paint, where love had always been the only currency that mattered.